My name is Maria Kressler, and I am the Executive Director of Ignatius House. Today's scripture, 1 Corinthians 13, is perhaps one of the most common scriptures used in wedding ceremonies. And I learned this week from my colleague and friend, Father Peter Fink, something he often uses in the sacrament of reconciliation. It has language that describes who God is, love. When we want to know more about what love looks like, we look at Jesus. We read the Gospels and see how he is in the world. Paul's letter describes love, and in doing so, describes God, attributes that Jesus clearly had. God is love, and Jesus is what God looks like in the flesh. It is often difficult for us to define love, so we try to describe what love looks like. In my early years of dating my now husband, John, we had lengthy conversations about the existence of God, for he was not a believer at the time. Today, he is a scientist and a believer, a professor in the ECE department of Georgia Tech. At the time, the young thinker that he was, he questioned the existence of God. In many ways, our friendship began over these philosophical and theological questions. I, raised Catholic and always a believer, was being challenged to find my own understanding of my faith in God and how best to convey God's existence. It was so strange to me at the time because I lived and breathed faith, hope, and love. It felt like it was a part of my DNA. I realized that when I tried to talk to this brilliant young mind about God, the only way I could was to talk about love. As our dating continued and our conversations deepened, I knew in my heart he knew God because he lived love. He was kind, patient, cared for others, forgiving, never rude, generous, and he didn't put on airs. I was falling in love with this non-believer who I believed was one of the most Christian persons I knew that apparently did not believe in God. I realized then that I associated these qualities of love to those living as followers of Christ. So as we talked and pondered creation in the world, up in the mountains, on a hike, looking at beauty, I asked him how he could not believe. Look at creation. Of course, he could tell me all about the Big Bang, the formation of the planets, etc., etc. So a bit defeated, we walked on. By this time in our relationship, John had professed that he loved me. He told me often that he loved me. It occurred to me as we were hiking that I couldn't prove the existence of God any more than he could prove that he loved me. I asked him, "Do you believe in love?" "Of course," he replied. Then I said, "Prove it." I wasn't trying to be difficult, but what I wanted to tease out was how we could possibly define the ineffable. Ultimately, I said to John, if you believe in love, then you believe in God. It's just semantics. And so like many, we reach for descriptions of behaviors, attitudes, sincerity. And so thus it began a wonderful spiritual journey together, which we are still on, learning more of God as we understand more of love. The truth is that John was communicating love by the way he lived in the world, treated others, sacrificed, etc. When Paul speaks of what love is, he ascribes behaviors. He identifies ways of being in the world. 1 Corinthians 13 makes it clear that actions alone are not enough if the way we perform the actions are not born in love. In fact, as Marjorie Eddington points out in her text, Love, the communication process, if we do not communicate with love, people simply will not hear us. And as Eugene Peterson so brilliantly phrases in the Message Bible, he tells us that eloquent speech will be over someday. Praying in tongues will end. Understanding will reach its limit, but love will never die. We are better lovers in the world when we are able to sit and believe in our own goodness and love, which comes first from our God. When we discover this within us, we are infinitely better at loving others. Sometimes we discover this through those that love us. Sometimes we discover this in the stillness of our hearts when we are alone. But in the end, there really is nothing that we have with us except love, and nothing that will remain after us but our legacy of love. When I sat down to reflect on these passages, it was the feast day of Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, someone who lived a life of simple loving. Everything she did with love, accepted with love, endured in love. The fragrance of her love, the love she found in God, passed on generations and generations. And here we are today. By the time this Contemplatio is sent to you, we will have celebrated another saint, St. Francis of Assisi, who also embodied these characteristics of divine love by the way in which he lived and loved and communicated. Perhaps today we can reflect on how well we are living the kind of loving that comes from knowing our God. Because, as paraphrased in the Message Bible, no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, I am bankrupt without love.